Welcome everyone to today's episode where we're joined by Raji Aiyer, a remarkable woman in technology and business. As a co-founder and CEO of Appearition, Raji has been at the forefront of steering the company's ambitious growth plans and embracing emerging technology. Her insights on company culture, immersive technology, innovation, and her experience as a woman in tech field make her a distinguished figure in the industry. In this episode, we'll explore Raji's journey, the challenges and the triumphs she's faced, and her vision for the future of technology and women entrepreneurship. So, Raji, it's really lovely to have you in today's show.
Thank you, PJ. It's great to be here today as well.
And so, Raji, for me, one of the interesting things that I found was that your co-founder is actually your partner. So, could you just walk us through how that journey came about and what inspired you to specifically focus on the VR space as well?
Sure. So we've always run businesses. My partner's always been an entrepreneur. He worked in one of the larger hyperscalers, but then decided that's not for him. So
Mm,
ever since I've met him, I've always been a part of his journey, worked in
yeah,
his ventures. This is our third venture. And I finished my master's and I was just starting to get back into the workforce. And he said, why don't you come on and join us? And, I'm thinking about, doing different kind of software practice and I just need
yeah,
some help putting together some processes. And why don't you just come on? And I started there on a 2-week stint.
yep,
But then I really loved what they were doing. And I said,
mm,
why not start this up as a business and scale it? And why
yeah,
not set that up as a separate entity? So that's really how it happened. I was there for 2 weeks. I really loved the software,
yep,
really looked at the vision on what that could be. And I started doing some research on
yep.
what the future looks like for that tech stack. And yeah, and then here I am, I suppose, 10 years later, and we're still doing this. So
Yeah. So, would you have ever imagined both of you creating a business together back 10 years ago or so?
oh, well, no, when I met him, it was almost 20 plus years
Okay,
ago.
20 years.
And
Yep.
I was never an entrepreneur and he was always an entrepreneur. And I
Ah,
never thought
okay.
that I was going to be a part of building and growing a business, let alone
Yep,
emerging bleeding tech, right? Never in
yep,
my wildest dreams. But yeah, I'm
yep,
not regretting it at all and haven't regretted it. I mean, there's been ups and downs and it's been really a challenging journey, but not regretting. It's been fantastic. I couldn't think of a better person to do it with, to be honest.
yep,
It's a safe space when you've got
yep,
your
yeah.
partner who has your back.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think it's because when I speak with a lot of people, I guess for a lot of people that are wanting to go into entrepreneurship journey, they always want a partner that could build it together. I think it's also when I think about entrepreneurship, I think about it in a sense of rather than the commercials, it's really about building something together. I think that's quite exciting on your end as well.
That's true. It's not. It's never about. It's not about the product alone, and it's not about the business, but it's about creating something of value
Yep.
that will grow, and that would do good.
Mm.
Work with a whole bunch of people, create something good, have a bunch of good customers, deliver good value.
Yep.
So overall, it's the notion of creating value and
Mm.
doing that for good.
Mm.
That's what brought us together. We're not the kind of people who would have thought that we would be in business together, but here we are,
Yeah.
and I don't think we would have it any other way.
Yeah, yeah, well said. And for a lot of females that might be listening to this, uh, what's kind of your advice on working with a partner and building up a business? Because like for example, my wife also gets involved in the business, and for a lot of business owners that are in a partnership, both in a relationship and business, sometimes you're going on a date and then I guess the business element slips in or it gets very intertwined. So would you be able to share some tips and tricks that you found quite useful?
Sure. I don't know if there are tips and tricks, but I
Yeah,
suppose everyone's life has got their own story and journey,
yeah,
and you kind of learn from it and adapt and adopt what you need to do.
mm,
This particular question is very tricky because there is no surefire answer. I
yeah,
would be lying if I said that work doesn't trickle over and
mm,
our boundaries don't collide. It
yeah,
certainly does,
mm,
quite horribly sometimes,
yeah,
quite nicely many times,
mm,
and very poorly very rarely. So which is good. Kids
yeah,
normally help balance things out. So focusing on the kids and what they want to do and the real
Yep.
things that matter help
Yeah.
us
Yep.
navigate through that challenge. And in a strange way, being on this journey together also helps us strengthen our relationship. Um,
Yep.
we understand each other's work ethics and
Mm.
moods and behaviors a lot better.
Mm.
And
Yep.
we've also gone through many life experiences where we've
Mm.
realized that we're building software. We want to grow a business. We're not saving lives. So we
Yep.
got to focus on the things that really matter. Take a step back, take a deep breath.
Mm.
So we kind of hold each other honest to those values
Mm.
on, are we really
Yep.
doing good? Is it going to affect a lot of people? Is
Mm.
our decision going to be the right thing to do? How do we do the right thing by the customers, by our people and team, and by the business first? So we
Mm.
kind of keep each other in check. But certainly having boundaries on where work starts and finishes,
Yep.
holding each other responsible when things start to kind of blur, and
Mm.
also making sure that you kind of take a deep breath, take a step back and say, okay, we're having a really bad day and
Mm.
it's affecting my partner more than it's affecting me. So let
Mm.
me not escalate the situation, but
Yep.
just take a deep breath and try and make reason with him or her
Mm.
to navigate through this thing. And making reason would mean doing something different, going for a walk, or just sitting down and saying, it's all going to be okay. Everything's going to be
Mm.
okay. This too shall pass. And at, at the moment, we're not, doing any critical services. We're not saving lives. So it can't be
Mm.
the worst thing if something gets delayed and we lose a project. It can't be the worst thing in life. They're far
Yep.
more detrimental items. So
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for pointing that out because, you know, I mean, from a personal experience, one of the things that's coming up for me is that work never stops, especially if the business is yours. I think there's just continuous amount of tasks that needs to get done. So sometimes it's just a lot of important items. But as you said, like it's sometimes just taking a step back and then thinking about what is really important. And I think it's so important to balance that out. I mean, one of the things that I've been reflecting on is yes, work is important, but at the same time, the kids are also important as well and making sure that they got the time and attention as well because I guess we'll never see them at that same stage of their life.
they grow up so
Again, I think
fast.
we should appreciate those unique moments.
And also don't forget those moments with your partner as well, because
Yeah.
you won't be 35 again or you won't be 40 again, and time
Yep.
just flies. So
Yeah, and then we talked a bit about the technology element. I mean, one of the things that I really liked, an item that you posted was about, I think it was Jeff Bezos sharing about the amount of immense opportunity in today's world and how in the past some of the greatest thinkers would have wished they were in today's realm. Um, and I guess some of the things that you're also working on is around experiential technology, VR, metaverse as well. In your perspective, I guess what's some of the trends that organizations need to be thinking about, and what's your thoughts on the future of work with all these immersive technologies coming in play?
I think there's quite a bit of attention on emerging tech now, especially with AI. So
Mm.
our approach when we start to work with the enterprises is really looking through what innovation means for them
Mm.
and what problems they want to solve. I think that's at the forefront. We always say that when you're looking at emerging tech, it needs to either make more money
Yep.
or save money or solve a
Mm.
compliance need, right? So it
Yep.
needs to kind of do one of those three things. And how does
Mm.
your tech help you do those things? So that's
Mm.
something that I really urge enterprises to consider. It's not emerging tech, it's about what solves the problem and how
Mm.
can it be best used within that enterprise workflow, and
Yep.
how ready are people for change and how do we navigate them through that change. So those
Mm.
are some of the key things that we ask about. Everything to do with technology is actually heavily reliant on change management.
Mm.
So it does involve people, it involves people's acceptance of technology and change. So we focus a
Yep.
lot on what would bring about the most amount of impact,
Mm.
which would have an easy change and transition process, but the impact is high. So
Mm.
the way we approach emerging tech is that just because we have a platform and we've got a whole kitty of solutions doesn't mean that
Mm. Yep.
we want to try and push that down someone's throat. It's
Mm.
about what works best for them. And that's the main reason why our platform's the way it is as well. It's kind of open, modular, and very easy to use, and it can be
Mm.
used across multiple things based on what you want to do. So we make it as
Yep.
easy and open, not from a platform perspective as well, also from a people and process perspective.
Mm.
So each enterprise is unique, and we acknowledge that, and we also urge them to understand that no one size fits all when it comes to technology.
Yeah. And one of the things that I saw in a recent report was that, at least in America, pretty much over 90% of organizations are thinking of adopting or see a use case in leveraging experiential technologies in their workplace. Obviously, in different use cases, and I think they've all identified that, like at least there'll be one use case where they do foresee experiential technologies playing out in their company. For an organization in Australia, whether it's small business to large enterprise, how would they approach like leveraging items around experiential technology? Because I mean, one of the items you did share just recently was the fact that just first of all figuring out what is the problem you're trying to solve for, and then looking at what technologies are worth embedding to solve that specific problem. Is there any other further insights you can share on that piece,
Sure,
Raji?
and there's three things that you need to look at, right? Because when you're thinking about innovation, it's really, really key that you start to look at what problem you're going to solve, how you're going to
Mm,
solve that problem, and what technology you're going to use. But you also need to look at the right people and partners who will help you solve that problem,
mm,
because not everyone can work with each and every problem, and you need to find the
mm,
partner that fits with you,
mm,
people who share your vision, people who
mm,
understand that what your goals are and who can deliver value to those goals. And you also need to measure the right metrics and get the right
mm,
feedback to keep on monitoring and measuring as you're innovating to see what else do I need to change incrementally? Is it going well? So just keeping a temperature check on it.
mm,
First and foremost, you'll need to start to look at a pilot or a proof of concept, as we call it. And
mm,
you get some learnings from it. You work with a core user group, end users, customers, a select
mm,
group of users who will tell you if there is a value proposition and if there's a
mm.
need for a business case to actually scale
Yep.
the technology that you're piloting. And it's
Mm,
really important to do that step, because without that, there is no scaling. And to understand how you need to
mm,
scale, what you need to scale, and where do I invest, I think the pilot and the POC approach, and that's a very common approach within the
mm,
enterprise space. Once you've done the POC, then it's important to understand that even scaling requires the right metrics and measurements and monitoring as you go along, because even
mm,
when you're scaling, you still need to do little pivots. So you need to work again with the right people, partners, and platform to
mm,
make sure that whoever you adopt to help you implement this change have got all those things in place that will help you navigate, make those little pivots, adjust the cells as we call it, and make sure they
mm.
deliver value, right?
Yeah.
Because once you've gone further down a deep tech scenario, it's
Mm,
very hard to come back up if you haven't measured it along the way.
yeah. Yep. And you talked about some of the ideas around how to make sure that the project's successful, just so that the audience can get a glimpse on what does success look like, along with some of the innovative clients or projects you've worked on. Are you able to share some interesting case studies with us that people might find interesting?
Sure. Success looks like is when it's made a significant difference in their workflow, and people can either learn better, do things just a little bit more faster and more efficient,
Mm,
right? So something that comes to mind is we worked with a large university in implementing
mm,
an augmented reality courseware for learning anatomy, which is a really um, complex concept to learn otherwise, right?
mm,
So the
yeah.
intention is that this isn't a standalone application. It needs to be working in their classroom with their courseware. So again,
Mm,
as with any other enterprise, it needs to reside within their systems and processes and structures.
yeah.
And what this meant was people can bring their own device. So this is not something that the university would provide devices as well. So you remove that barrier straight away. So it's
Mm,
BYOD. It could go on people's mobile phones and tablets if they've got. And even if they can't use those mobile phones and tablets, there's a digital way to actually run it on your laptop as well. So which means that you kind of make adoption a lot more easier for users to use. You don't give them any fancy names. You just say, here's a very easy courseware tool for you to understand this piece of anatomy, learn a
Mm.
bit better, work out how the muscles and the nerves work hand in hand, how they contract, how they expand. Here's a very easy way. So for us, and this was something which happened like 5-6 years ago, right? So when the technology was still nascent, phones and connectivity was still not as good as right now.
Yeah.
But for us, the fact that the classroom embraced it, took it on, and 5-6 years later, they're still using it within the classroom space and consistently growing it. I think that for me was exciting. And the
Yeah.
key learnings we had was the fact that working with the end user, understanding what their pain points were, and working with the lecturers who kind of knew what learning outcomes that they wanted to get, what they wanted to measure, and giving them a free rein on how they wanted to run the classroom, have control over what data that they wanted to see, and have dashboards that help them grow that, I think was very interesting for us. So
Yeah.
it was just not just the content, it was also data. It was also not altering how people learned in the classrooms significantly, but just introducing just another tool, a digital tool that enhanced their learning, but also reduced the time that the facilitators and lecturers had to spend within the classroom space as well. So we look at that as small digital tools that are introduced along in the workflow, which shifts small parameters to a greater extent and incremental change rather than disruption, which is a lot harder, especially for they're not universities are never looked upon as innovators, but in this case they
Yep.
were. They embraced it. Done the right way, it sticks.
Yep. Yep. Totally agree with you. And you raise a very important point, which is change your increments like one step at a time. I think, in today's world, at least some people have this expectation that they want the results quick. They want things happening quick. However, like sometimes going slow allows you to go really fast. And I think that's quite an important note there. And the reason I say that is, I guess one of the things that I've been personally finding is that whole R&D space of doing the customer question, like customer development, which is like speaking with the customers, the different stakeholders, getting feedback. It's sometimes a grueling process for new entrepreneurs. However, when you speak with the customers and the different stakeholders and get the feedback, it really refines the product, but also it allows you to think about things that you thought weren't important but become very important for the end user,
Actually,
which sometimes
it's
it is that, it's not having a million things in a
it, it,
product, but
it's a very interesting point you raise, because it also makes you think about all the things that you thought were important, but it's actually not important at all for
exactly,
the end
yeah,
users.
yeah, yeah,
Because they give you the best feedback, and also
yeah,
sometimes very brutal. So as an entrepreneur, I think you need to love your product, but you need to love your users even more, because you need to be able to say, yep, we've worked so hard on it, but I'm going to scrap it because the users are telling me there's no real value. The customers are telling me I'm not going to pay for it because there's no real value. So it more often it tells us what's not working. And when things are working, no one ever really says anything, right? I mean, I've been in a
yeah,
situation where we've had a customer for about 10 years, and they said to us, and we said, we need to upgrade your applications. It's a digital application. And, in digital life, 7 or 8 years is a long time to be running an
yeah,
application. And they said, it's a fantastic application. That's the first time we've ever heard
mm,
them say that. It is a fantastic application. Everyone
mm,
uses it every day, and everybody knows how to use it. It's running. I have no
yeah,
issues. Please don't touch it.
yeah, yeah. Um, and then just, I guess, in terms of just the customer and the whole decision making process, one of the things I'm seeing is a lot of uptake, even in the Australian business environment. Uh, is there's been numerous applications from my understanding, whether it's workplaces thinking about how they can use experiential technologies to onboard new employees, train them. In the real estate space, a couple of new startups are implementing it to showcase clients virtually so they can have a real feel around the property. But even I think the army has also tested out this capability to do real live trading without impacting the workforce's health or the severe consequences of having a on-field experience. I guess the thing that comes in my mind is that for a lot of organizations, there's always a innovator within the organization looking to get buy-in to test these new ideas and I guess allow the decision makers to also approve this. Obviously, one of the key stakeholders in a lot of organizations is the CFO. I understand in your role previously you were in the fintech space, and then you transition. You've gone through your career to become a CFO as well. So it'll be good to get your uptake on, as a decision maker, um, what what kind of things are they looking for to say, yes, let's try out this technology, let's invest our time in it, let's invest our commercial investments as well in this?
So it's a great question, because the CFOs are the key stakeholder in making any information technology or digital transformation decisions, right?
Yep.
Because they are the only stakeholder who's got visibility across a business quite deep in terms of
Yep.
what's happening commercially, what's happening
Mhm.
financially, and
Yep.
where are we bleeding money,
Mm.
right? So, and more often than not, digital transformation projects are the ones that will be bleeding a lot of cash if not
Yep.
done well. So
Yep.
from that perspective, I think one of the key things that I have, I've worked in FinOps, and in my previous roles, I've worked in working through transformation projects to understand, the cost and funding, and how do I manage the budgets and things like that.
Mm.
And one of the things that I found was the key challenge as a CFO that I've had in the past was not the cost of technology, not the cost of data, but it was actually the cost of implementing and managing
Yep.
the technology. It was
100%.
never spot
Yep.
on. It
Mm.
was never spot on. You could never put a price on how much am I going to pay to get this into my enterprise and to manage it on an ongoing basis, because
Mm.
any boundaries that you put on that is just blown out of proportion.
Mm.
So I
Yep.
think the whole system integrator or a consulting approach and on how we engage with service providers on how they're going to actually orchestrate this POC to scalable solution to ongoing maintenance to
Mm.
upgrades, that needs to be thought out upfront. And
Yep.
that's where finding the right partner becomes really, really key, because
Mm.
more or less the CFO is not just trying to look, I was not really trying to look at the badge of success, but I was trying to look at what's the group of project people I'm working with. What are their values like? Can I
Mm.
trust them? So when
Mm.
when we used to do a POC, it was almost always capped off at the POC. And the POC was
Okay.
always a gateway to say,
Yep.
here's a very limited budget, a small budget POC,
Mm.
but I'm going to put the gates up there because I'm not going to
Mm.
commit to any scaling until we've completed the POC and I know there's a business case.
Yep.
And then you
Mm.
need to work together on a business case on what scaling implementation looks like. And trying to keep them fixed cost
Yep.
was always the key. And I think with the way technology has evolved now and the software space has evolved now, getting fixed cost for those soft items that has always been in shades of gray is getting
Yep.
easier and easier. I also think that enterprises now have a lot more bargaining power than they used to, because CFOs are very clear and they have a very clear understanding on what implementing technology looks like now as opposed
Yep.
to 20 years ago.
Mm.
So which is really great, because they know what we're talking about when we talk about service side, when we talk about the infrastructure costs and cloud costs and things like that.
Yep.
They're completely aware of what the choices are, and what the vendor persona and the vendor groups look like. So it makes our discussion as a software vendor really easy, but
Yep.
challenging for us to substantiate a lot of the stuff that we do, but makes it very easy to have that conversation. But when I was on the CFO side, there was always shades of gray. And I'm seeing that has actually kind of tapered off now. CFOs are very, very switched on about technology costs because that underpin
Yep.
everything else, how the businesses are run these days. So,
Yep. Yep. Well said. And
so
I
hopefully that
think the CF,
gave you a
the
good
CF,
insight on.
what was that, Raji?
I said hopefully that gave you a good insight on the knowledgeable CFO or the IT backed CFO these days, compared to when I started my career, actually.
Yeah, well, I think you shared a very important point because the reality is, um, anyone that's looking to get buy-in to test out these technologies, they do ultimately need the CFO's approval. That's just the reality of things. And I think for people to understand the context that CFOs are operating in, it really helps allow them to build up the business case within the business to go, this is what we think. This would be a good, innovative idea to test out as a business. Because I used to actually work with a lot of CFOs in the past, and I do believe the CFO's role has changed significantly, in the sense that they're getting heavily involved in IT. But as you said, also because they're getting heavily involved in the whole IT space because of the digital transformation that their remit falls under, is they are getting aware of, okay, well, what works, what doesn't work. They're connecting with their peers as well to learn, okay, well, what's working, what's not. Because over the years, there's been, even in Australia, there's been like hundreds and thousands of dollars to millions of dollars of just failed transformation happening within the business, where they're investing a lot of money in the infrastructure and then realizing that the implementation hasn't gone quite well. And I think you do really raise an important point, which is, it's not just about the technology, it's about the whole implementation, onboarding, the change management piece, getting the users actually getting the buy-in and wanting to use the solution as well. I think that's quite critical.
When we look at enterprises, we look at implementing small digital tools that incrementally provide the change that they need, right? So they don't need to redo or overhaul their infrastructure. And I think that's going to stick in the future in looking at digital tools that will change a workflow and then incrementally grow that out, so that the large transformation projects are not going to be viable because there's no end point to it, and they kind of just evolve into something else over a period of time. And I think CFOs are in favor for small changes which have most impact.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it's about the trust as well. Like, I think once you've been able to show, yes, we've been able to deliver this small pocket, then you can kind of build up on that as well. I mean, I think time has gone quite fast because I'm looking at the time now. I'm like, oh my god, 27 minutes has already gone. But as we come closer to the end of the podcast, so some of the things that I just wanted your perspective on is, there's a lot of tools recently, whether it's the Google Glasses, the Facebook VRs, to different technologies. I mean, is there any key trends that people should kind of keep an eye out for, Raji?
I think generally that space has evolved quite a bit from where we started off. So certainly organizations are now working through an XR strategy, which was never the case when we started off 10 years ago. And when right now large organizations are putting an XR strategy through. So the acceptance that post the AI, XR and AI, which is AR and AI and VR and AI, that wave is just going to hit in the next 5 years. So being prepared for that and understanding what are the use cases and how can my organization adopt it. What do I test and tease out now so I'm ready when everything scales? Being a adoption these days takes much faster and more quicker, like with OpenAI and how they gained 1 million users is much faster than anything else, right? So when things hit, so you're not lagging behind, but also know that there are trusted partners available to navigate you through that journey. So when you have questions, feel free to pick up the phone and speak to people like us who can tell you what is it that you need to be looking at from an XR perspective. What kind of an enterprise are you, small, medium, and how can we do something for you that fits the budget but has an impact and you're ready when the wave hits. So it's all about making sure you're staying abreast of the trends. The devices are evolving with Apple coming into play now. The devices will continue to evolve. We're not quite there from a lightweight and from a connectivity perspective on how easy it is to use AR, but I think in the 5 years we will get there as well. So just being aware, speaking to the right people and having your own right partner really makes it easier for you. You're not alone in this journey, and there are lots of experts to guide you through that.
Yeah. And you bring up an important point, particularly I think your last point around the expert piece, which is, I think in today's world, there's just so much information happening, so much trends happening. Like, for a lot of leaders, it is very hard to keep up to date with just everything at a deep level as well. I think that one of the tips that I really resonated with was almost getting like the leader. Their key role is to almost have a helicopter view of what's happening in terms of trends, and if there's any trends that's really applicable to them, really, leveraging their contacts, leveraging people like yourself, Raji, to get a more in-depth understanding of how does that impact their business. Because to be an expert in everything, I think in today's world is just becoming so hard because the pace of innovation is just literally increasing like faster and faster. And I think the only way we can really get through and really gain unique perspective is to get a holistic view, keep up to date, and then really connect with yourself, Raji, around the more specific technicalities of what's
It's a
happening in
very
specific
it's a very
spaces.
noisy space. It's a very
Oh
noisy space at the
yeah,
moment, the technology
yeah,
landscape. So make
yeah,
sure you find the right, and it's very easy to connect with experts these days,
yeah.
between LinkedIn and other sources.
Mm,
Reach out to people, ask the questions, and when you feel like you can trust someone and someone aligned with your enterprise values and what
mm,
you're trying to do, have a chat to them and understand what can be done, because it's easier to be prepared than
yep,
to then react
yep.
when things have hit and you need to catch up.